and welcome back. And if you didn't see last week's episode, you probably have one big burning question, which is, where on earth am I? But if you did see last week's episode, you know that this is now my new space and everything we film is going to be right in here. And this space is filled with all of the projects, and I'm just absolutely in love with it. And the very first project that we're going to tackle is, well, you saw the thumbnail, a PDP-11. Now, the story of how I got it is a pretty interesting one. A Patreon member, John, whose name is right there, he clued me into a eBay auction that was going on for a PDP-11. With mini computers, it's really just a game of chance and luck, because they're so big and so heavy that you can't really ship them, and at least not expect them to survive or ship them in an affordable manner. So it comes all down to having one pop up locally for an affordable price. And that's actually exactly what happened with the Centurion. It showed up in Oklahoma and I was able to drive up and get it. And even the counterfeit Centurion was in Dallas, which was close enough for me to go get. So if the PDP-11 auction wasn't in Texas, Arkansas maybe, or even Oklahoma, it was really not going to be something that I could get. And when I opened it up, I saw that it wasn't in one of those three states. It was actually all the way up in Pennsylvania. But then I saw that it was in the city of Pittsburgh. Now that's interesting because Pittsburgh is very, very far away from Texas. It's about, 1,200 miles or so. And I certainly wasn't going to be able to ship it from Pittsburgh to here, but my brother lives in Pittsburgh and he has an amazing little shop there called Love It Sundries. They make all sorts of really cool stuff like soaps and shampoos and conditioners, and they all make it themselves. I'm like super proud of my brother. So definitely go check out Love It Sundries. But he lives in Pittsburgh, so maybe there was a chance here. And my parents happen to live here in Texas. So I talked to my parents and they were actually planning on going to visit my brother at the end of the month. This was last month. And so there was a chance that they could stuff the mini computer into the back of their SUV and bring it back for me. So I wouldn't have to pay for shipping or worried about it being shipped improperly. So I threw out a bid on it and I won the auction for cheaper than I was expecting. And then I sent a message to the very kind gentleman up in Pittsburgh that had it, got the address, and it turned out it was like less than a mile from my brother's shop. It was practically the same neighborhood. Talk about serendipitous, right? So he held onto it in his warehouse until my parents got up there. They loaded it into the back of their SUV, drove it all the way down to here. We unloaded it and it's now in this room. And again, if you saw last week's episode, you actually saw the PDP-11. It's over in the corner next to the counterfeit machine. So let's wheel it out into the center of the room so we can kind of take a look at what's going on and then maybe figure out a game plan for what we want to do for today. I am certainly not going to try to put power into it today. There's a lot of stuff that we've got to double check and figure out what's going on. Also, I tend to go into these projects blind initially. So I don't know anything about the PDP-11. What I like to do is see the hardware firsthand, figure out what it is that I'm looking at, and then do a boatload of reading. So that way I have some form of context for the stuff that I'm reading. So all we're doing today is getting familiar with the hardware, what it is that we got, and then I'm gonna do a ton of research, and in the next episode of the series, we're gonna start trying to figure out what we can put power into, what needs work, what doesn't need work, and we're gonna go from there. So let's wheel it out and get started. All right, first things first, the ADM3A here did not come with the machine. It was a project that I already had. It's just sitting on top of there because I need a place to put it. But we're just gonna go ahead and get it out of the way. And then the machine itself had two covers on the front here that cover up things like that and like that, or rather like that. But we don't need these at the moment, and also they don't stick. They have these little plastic Velcro type things that don't work anymore. These were actually taped on to the actual machine. So again, we're just gonna set those to the side. And then having it stuffed here in the corner is gonna make it a little difficult to figure out what's going on. So let's just go ahead and wheel it right on out here to the center of the room. Well, and here it is in all of its glory. Now that it's in the center of the room, we can get a much better look at it. And on the front here, with those two cover panels removed, we can see some of the storage options that they had installed in this thing. The first is this giant 5¼ inch full height Maxtor hard drive. And the second is a tape drive down here that looks to actually still have a tape in it. Now there's two more 5¼ inch drive bays that are unpopulated, but we have these open, so we could theoretically put another hard drive in there, or even a 5¼ inch floppy drive. That's something for the future though, because right now we actually do have some form of storage on the machine, which raises the question of what's behind this panel here and this panel here, which are panels that are big enough that they could hold a drive the size of a Hawk drive. It's pretty much a full 14-inch platter hard drive. Well, there's nothing behind them. They're totally empty. 90% of the heft of this machine is in the actual case. So there's nothing there. Pretty much everything that we're looking at is going to be right here, right in the center. And aside from these very cool drives that we have on the front, there's really not a whole lot we can see. So let's circle around to the back, and from there we can start get an idea of what we're up against. Here at the back of the machine, we can get a better idea of what's going on. You can see that the two massive drive bays are actually empty. And there's some interesting things going on with the side panels, because you can see that this side panel has vents just like this side panel has on the front, which means that these are identical parts. One is just flipped around. And well, having vents on it means that there might be fans in it. I'm not really sure. That's something that we're going to have to figure out a little later. But before we get that far, you can see that this machine has a ridiculous number of DB25 ports on it. I'm imagining that these are all RS-232 serial ports, and this one right here that's underneath the 7-segment LEDs is going to be the master or port 0 or whatever. But that's insane. Maybe it was meant to use like 30 users or something, I don't know. But this whole piece here that has all the ports on it is actually separate from the computer itself. The computer itself is all in front of that. Now the power is also very interesting. The power supply seems to be down here, and the plug for it is a 125 volt 30 amp plug. But I'm pretty sure that the big, huge disk drives were meant to plug into this. And so the computer itself is certainly not going to require 30 amps. Also, here on the back, we have one more port. This one is blue with 3 rows of pins. No clue what that's for. And as a matter of fact, the only way to kind of figure out what's going on and to actually see what kind of computer cards that we have in there is to start taking this thing apart. And I think the very first step is going to be trying to get these side pieces off, because they're not really on there correctly right now anyways. They're kind of jammed in place and not all the way down. So we need to just get those off, get them out of the way to give us clean access to the computer itself. So that's our first step. First things first, let's get the side panels off of the machine, and it is definitely a bit fiddly. But once I got them loose, I couldn't even get them all the way off because there was a grounding strap in the way. So I had to remove that grounding strap, and once that was gone, I could actually slide the machine away from the panels. And with the machine out of the way, the sound deadening foam inside of the side panels was just falling apart, so I had to clean some of that up. And the two side panels are actually connected to each other. So if I just remove the screw and then push up on the connection piece here, it actually pops right out. And that'll allow me to move the side panels just out of the way for now. Next, I want to remove the rear upper piece. It actually comes apart in 2 pieces, but with the first piece off, I can get access to the 2 screws that hold the second piece to the chassis, and then that piece comes right off as well. And after that, I want to get the top panel off, and it is held on with 4 screws. Just remove those 4 screws and it lifts right off. With that out of the way, I get pretty easy access to the 4 nuts that hold on the top drive block-off panel, and the same goes for the lower piece as well. Then the plastic filler panel has just a simple little plastic clasp. Pop that in and it pulls right off with ease. Next, we'll remove the Maxtor hard drive. We can only pull it out a little bit, and then I have to kind of reach around to the back and disconnect the ribbon cables, which then let me pull it out all of the way, and then I can finally disconnect the power cable, which allows me to get the drive fully out. Here on the back is the RS-232 distribution box, and I want to get this out next, but I tried swinging it open and it only moves about 3 inches. So I tried pulling the computer out, and again, it only moves about 6 inches. So I did some more searching on the back, and it seems there's some quick release screws that allow the panel to flip down, and this gives access to all of the ribbon cables that are connecting the computer to the distribution box. So I can disconnect all of those cables, and this big rainbow ribbon cable here is the main problem. It's the reason that nothing was moving, and it actually has to be disconnected from the card. And also, this was a terrible idea, but one cable went from the main computer to the sub-computer chassis, and they routed it around the door, which is a total pain. But that let me get the RS-232 distribution box fully off, and now I can finally start removing the 2 boxes that hold the computer. Both the upper and lower boxes just slid right out, even though they're quite heavy. And the cabinet is getting very empty. I just want to get the power distribution box on the very bottom here. And it's got that huge 125 volt 30 amp cable on it. So I want to just pull that off just for my own sanity's sake for moving things around right now. So just unscrew the lid and unscrew the terminal connectors. And now it's time to clean some of this stuff up. And we're going to start with the sound deadening foam and the side panels. And as you can see, it just crumbles away. This stuff had deteriorated horribly, and so I just did a lot of vacuuming to clean up as much of the grossness as I could, and while doing that I realized that the glue that was used to hold the foam to the plastic was actually peeling away in like a full sheet. So that actually helped me get the plastic nice and clean, but that's wild. I've never seen the glue do that before. But with all of that off, the side panels then got carried outside to get a wash with the hose, as did pretty much every other piece on the cabinet. And this was mainly to wash off the big dirt and dust that had kind of caked itself on. And while that was all drying, it was time to work on the sound deadening or the sealing foam that's on the side of the chassis. This foam actually seals against the side panel to create a nice ducted flow of air in and out of the machine, but it's just falling apart anyways. So I removed it, vacuumed it, and then I used a wire brush to clean up as much of it as I could, vacuuming it as the brush was pulling it off. After that, I wheeled the main chassis outside and gave it a proper spray down. And then while it was drying, I brought each of the panels that got washed earlier inside and wiped them down with Simple Green. And while I had the Simple Green out, I even gave the little Maxtor hard drive a little bit of a wipe down as well. And now it's time to start putting things back together. And I'm going to start with the lowest most piece and work our way up. And that means that next is the lower drive block-off plate. With it in place, we move up to the plastic filler piece, which just snaps right in. And then directly above that is the upper drive block-off plate. And then I'm going to move around to the back of the machine and put that rear upper piece in. And I'm going to start with the bottom half. But to make sure that everything's lining up correctly, I'm actually going to put the top cover on before I put the top half on. And then once the top cover was fully installed, I brought the top piece of that little back part over and screwed it down. And then finally, we get to put the side panels back on. And they were a little fiddly, but I got them. And before I wheel this away, I want to put the RS-232 distribution box back in, but my wonderful camera placement means that I'm just going to block the view while I do that. All right, it took a bit of effort, but we got the meat and potatoes of the machine out and here on the desk, and that allowed us to take the chassis out and give it a proper wash, and it shined up real nice. It's looking beautiful, with the exception of the tape residue that's left over from the tape that was used to hold the little front panel pieces on. And I've attacked that with Goo Gone, with Windex, with Simple Green, and just nothing seems to put a dent in it. So if anybody has any ideas about how to get that stuff off without damaging the paint underneath it, I'm all ears, because I would love to get that cleaned up and looking perfect, because the rest of it looks really good. Now, we're not going to dig into these two today, because there's one more thing that I want to finalize on the chassis first, and that is the power distribution thing that's down here. This had a huge 125 volt 30 amp plug coming out of it. I've since removed that plug because it's unwieldy and I don't have anything to plug into it anyways. Also, this thing has a ton of plugs on the front, and so it's meant to take a lot more heavy duty or heavy load stuff than these two can supply. Each one of these has its own power supply built in, which is this part right here. And it's rated at 100 to 120 volts at 6 amps. Now, depending on how many cards are populated, it may or may not pull all of that. But that means that at the absolute maximum, we're only ever going to pull 12 amps with this machine. So I don't need a 30 amp plug for that. Well, everything in here is on a 20 amp breaker, so I should be able to run it off of the wall plug relatively easily. So I think I'm going to modify this so that I can plug it into the wall normally to just power these two initially. But before I do that, I want to crack this open and take a look at the inside, because just looking through the grill here, it's super dusty. And to get this top grill off, there are just 2 screws on the side here. I've already removed one, so we'll just go ahead and pop this one loose here. And with that screw removed, the grill should just slip right off. And yeah, there we go. Check that out. That's very cool. We can see that it is actually just a distribution block. There's 4 sockets that are 2-gang sockets here, which explains the 8 plugs on the other side. There's 3 10 amp breakers that are in parallel, so we get our 30 amp breaker there. And then we have a transformer here that is presumably knocking down to 5 volts or 12 volts or something like that for these 4 plugs that are on the back side here. And one of these 3-pin plugs was actually plugged into the power supply of the primary unit for the computer. So I'm not really sure what that is. I'm guessing it's a voltage okay or line voltage okay or some kind of signal like that that tells the computer it's okay to turn on. But it is disgusting in here. So I'm going to take this over to the air compressor and blow it completely out. Yeah, that was a very dusty power distribution block. But while I have it apart, I want to change out the cable. Instead of one big 30 amp plug, I'm going to use 2 13 amp extension cords in parallel. All right, I'm going to interrupt there for a second. That's a dumb and dangerous idea. And I was aware of it, but I was like, it'll be all right. And then I talked to some people on the Discord and on the Patreon, and they were like, no, that's dumb and dangerous. Don't be an idiot. And you know what? They're absolutely right. This is stupid. The problem is that if one of these ever comes unplugged from here, this is now backfed with live AC, and you can just touch it. Granted, nothing's plugged into the wall right now, so I can touch it and nothing bad is going to happen. But my thinking was that this, this surge protector here would be dedicated to this whole machine. I would put a little note on here that says never unplug the 2 of them while it's on or anything like that. So this would act like a master switch, and then it would just be an extension cord between the 2, whatever. But things happen. Maybe the note falls off. Maybe I forget. Maybe I pull it out too far and only one of them comes unplugged. And, well, then bad things can happen. And I really shouldn't build this in such a way that a simple mistake can result in injury. Now, also, it's doubly stupid because the dedicated surge protector that I have here at the moment is only capable of like 13 amps anyways, so it wouldn't even ever be able to push more than what one of these cables can handle. But again, ultimately, I don't think this machine is ever going to pull more than about 6 amps anyways, so really one cord is fine, and this is a little sketch. So we're not going to do sketch. I'm going to remove one of these and just leave it with one at the 13 amp capability. And if we ever start stacking more things into this cabinet and we need a lot more power capability, well, we'll take it from there. Now I'm going to return you back to the original video, and I do mention this, but keep that in mind that this has since changed. All right, I've got my new double AC wires wired in here, and let's go ahead and give this thing a test. I've got them plugged into a power strip right now, so I can just flip the power on. And so if I flip the switch, yeah, check that out. A little light comes on here to let me know that it's actually plugged into live AC. That's crazy. Now the circuit breaker is off, so we shouldn't be seeing any voltage here, and we're not. That's good. We're seeing 0.00 volts. So if I flip this circuit breaker on, we should see line voltage on our voltmeter here. So let's go ahead and give that a shot. And we don't. There it goes. That's interesting. The little toggle switch here controls whether the contactor is on or not. If I have it set to A, we're not getting any voltage out of that. If I have it set to O, nothing. But if I flip it over to B, I can hear the contactor kick off, and then we get 121 volts out of here. So apparently this little toggle switch on the back is controlling which ones of these are powered up. Let's check some of the other ones and see what they measure out to. Okay, so J4 over here required the toggle switch to be in B. Right now I've got the toggle switch in O, so that J4 was off. If I flip the circuit breaker here, I'm connected up to J3 now, and look at that, I'm getting 120 volts out of J3 with the toggle switch in O. If I flip it over to A, or I flip it over to B, that one stays at a pure 120 volts. So it is just a straight pass-through. It doesn't go through a contactor or anything. That's really interesting to know. And then over here, both J5 and J6 seem to work the same as J4. So if I'm in A or O, does nothing, but as soon as I flip to B, contactor kicks off and I get my 120 volts coming out of there. So J4, J5, J6 are all in parallel, and then J3 over here is just a pure pass-through. And then finally, the 3-prong plug on the back here looks to be a 22 volt center pin. So if I flip the switch here, we can see that the center pin is reading 22.2 volts. And I think that both of the outside pins are ground because there's absolutely no voltage differential between them. And there's a little marking here that says that the leftmost pin on this one and the rightmost pin on this one are both ground, but these don't look to be flipped directionally, so I'm just guessing that both of the outside pins there are ground, which means that the inside pin here is going to be giving us a nice DC 22 volts. Now I say 22 volts, if I flip the switch here to B to kick the contactor over, it actually drops down to about 17 volts. So maybe this is actually supposed to be something like 12 volts and it's just expecting a lot more load or something like that. But we have a really nice clean DC signal coming out of our power distribution block here. So I think that means that everything inside of here is working perfectly, which is awesome. So we'll go ahead and toss it back in the cabinet. There we go. The cabinet is all back together. We've got our RS-232 distribution box in. We've got our power distribution box in. It is also now wired up so we can plug it into the wall outlets that we have in here. And all that's left is to dive into the computer itself. And that's what we're going to do in the next episode. Or rather, I should say episodes, because that is going to be a serious endeavor. This was the easy part. I took a look at some of the boards in there and they are filthy, just completely covered with dust. So I want to pull every single board out, clean it off completely, and also catalog what boards we have, what they might do, and maybe we can start figuring out what this system was used for. And once we get all of that clean, we can then take a look at the storage drives that we have, because we have that big Maxtor drive, hard drive, and we also have that tape drive, which currently still has a tape in it. So we've got a lot more to come on the PDP-11 here. So I hope to see you guys in the next episodes, because I am super excited about this machine. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope to see you next time.